This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
The opinions on this program are those of the program host and guest and not necessarily those of WPSL. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. Legal questions? Ask a lawyer. Give us a call at 340-1590, 340-1590 here at the studios of WPSL. And Ask a Lawyer with your host, attorney Stuart M. Address.
Good morning, Treasure Coast. This is Stuart Address, and this is Ask a Lawyer. I normally start out by saying I hope you all had a good week. I'm looking forward to a nice weekend. Well, I still hope you're looking forward to a nice weekend. But I know that only 50.1% of you had a good week. How do I know that? Because that's the margin of the election for governor. We had an interesting election, folks, on Tuesday, and I figured I'd talk about it a little bit before we get into my practice areas and things of that nature. I've always believed that everybody should go out and vote, and I've always believed that here in the U.S., so few people really do. We usually have voting at around 45% of registered voters for big elections like president. And for off years like this, 30%, primaries, 25%. And it's interesting that in a country like ours that is built on these freedoms, that so many of us choose not to exercise it, when there are innumerable nations throughout the world where people would beg for the right to vote or the right to vote in a free and honest election, not a sham. So why do I say every vote counts? Most elections are runaways. Sometimes you see it 72, 28. I mean, your vote didn't really count, did it? I don't know, maybe not. But there are so many elections that are razor thin. And there are more and more of them in the modern day. So let's look at our gubernatorial election just 3 days ago. It's not over. Oh, a winner was, projected by all the networks and cable, and it may very well end up that way. I'm not trying to have a political discussion. But out of 8.2 million, out of 13 million registered voters in Florida, 8.2 million voted. That is a rate of 62%. It's an extraordinary percentage for our country. And in the gubernatorial election, right now, out of 8.2 million votes, right now, former Congressman DeSantis, now the presumptive governor, is ahead by only 35,000 votes. 35,000 out of 8.2 million. And that is less than 0.5%. And that, by state law, triggers a recount. Now, we have two types of recounts in Florida. Some of us may know this painfully from 2000. We have the electronic recount, which is what's going to happen right now in the gubernatorial election. And we have a hand recount that takes much more time and is much more painstaking. Well, guess what? We're doing that for senator. Because in the race for Senate between Senator Nelson and Governor Scott, who is the presumptive senator who defeated the incumbent Bill Nelson, is ahead out of 8.2 million votes by 15,000. That is less than 0.25%. And under state law, that triggers a hand recount of all ballots when it's that close. So we are probably not going to know our governor or our senator for weeks, if not a month or more. And guess what? We all know what's going to happen, right? All the, I'd like to believe that one day they'll call me, but they haven't. All these great lawyers have descended upon Florida now, from Washington and New York, election lawyers. And they're all ready for, the 4 primary candidates. They're ready for Governor Scott. They're ready for Senator Nelson. They're ready for Mayor Gilliam. And they're ready for Congressman DeSantis. They're all here. And Governor Scott's already started by suing Broward and Palm Beach counties, alleging that there was some finagling that allowed more Democratic votes. So the legal battles have begun, even before the recounts are done.
But they're claiming uncounted votes, too. Now that, hello.
Well, I don't think Governor Scott is claiming uncounted votes in Palm Beach or Broward. But yes, there is an issue of uncounted votes.
Those people voted, and their
right.
vote should be counted.
And that's what is going to be looked at in a recount, absolutely, especially a hand recount.
But how on election night do we sit there and watch the networks give us the information when here we are all these days later and we still, whoops, we have some uncounted votes?
Well, there are many times where the networks say, they continue to say it's too close to call, even at 2 in the morning.
Right.
And there is no announced projected winner.
Okay, but let me ask you this. If it was not so close, would those people's votes just go in the they go in a box, they go into storage?
If it was not so close and there were some things missed, it would not matter. It would not be counted.
Now let's just say that the 2 losers conceded and we just went on our merry way. Those votes still would not be counted.
You're right. They would not be counted.
Okay. We've got a little bit of a problem in those counties.
Well, that's true. Well, throughout the country, look.
Yeah.
I will be the first to concede, as I concede throughout America. Nothing is perfect. Our election system is not perfect. Our judicial system is not perfect. Our political system is not perfect. But it's still the best
Stuart,
there is.
I can press a button on my iPhone, and it can show me where I'm sitting right now.
I know.
How come we can't get it right?
But what happens if somebody hacks that iPhone and says you're somewhere else?
Oh, goodness.
See, that's the problem with electronic voting. Back in the olden days when I was old enough to vote.
Maybe not electronic voting, but that there's an electronic counting system.
Well, there should be. There are different types of machines, and there should be, paper backups.
Mm-hmm.
And most systems, I think, have that now, although some don't. But I remember when I was first able to vote, I'd go into this monstrous machine that had a curtain that closed, and I'd literally pull levers.
Right.
And what would happen is that would be recorded inside the machine, not just electronically, because it wasn't as advanced back then. It would be recorded in a different way that
it was mechanical.
A backup.
It was mechanical, yeah.
Okay, and those are probably the best systems, even though they're older dinosaurs. Do we have a caller here?
We do.
We do. Well, that's great. Hey, Terry on line 1. How are you?
I'm injured.
Injured?
My taxi cab service did not show up to take me to 5 good, important appointments. Now, I know I can sue him, but the question is, will I win any money?
That's always a very good question, because every case has 2 parts, liability and damages. And sometimes you have great liability, but either there are no real damages or no legally recoverable damages, or the person is, essentially damaged judgment proof, and, a judgment is good for wallpaper. In your situation, somebody didn't show up. Well, essentially, you entered into a contract with that taxi cab service.
Right.
And if they did not show up, they breached the contract.
Right.
So, from that perspective, I think legally you have a viable claim. Now, in terms of damages, honestly, I am not sure what recoverable damages really exist. Now,
if it was a company versus
but
an Uber driver.
If you had to call another company on short notice to get to those 5 appointments, and it cost you an extra $50, that would be the measure of your damages, and you could recover it in small claims court. But if you missed those appointments and ended up rescheduling them, even though it's aggravation to you, there's no real recoverable damages.
Well, I might have went blind by missing that appointment.
But did you? And is there a medical expert who's going to say that as a result of that single delay, this is what caused the blindness?
Well, I'm not blind, but I haven't been to a good doctor yet because of the taxi cab, and he wouldn't answer his phone.
Well, you need to get to a doctor, and I do suspect, honestly, that it's going to be virtually impossible for any competent doctor to tie a particular injury to a particular delay of, a day or two or what have you. That's going to be hard to do.
All right, thank you.
You're very much. Thank you for calling. Appreciate it. So, and folks, keep on calling. Any question you have, I usually start the show with that. It's 340-1590. And if you're afraid to talk to me on air, you can call Cheryl at the office. And that's 781-8003. And look, she's nicer to talk to anyway, and she's sweet. And, I'm gruff and, not really. But anyway, so those are two numbers that you can call. Going back, to the election, we have less than 0.25% in the Senate race and less than 0.5% in the gubernatorial race. So we have the recounts, and what's going to follow? Litigation, lawsuits. And when will they end? They'll probably, the senatorial will have to end really before January 3rd when the new Congress convenes. And, that means expedited appeals. And since it's a federal election, it means, potentially the Supreme Court, if they'll hear it. And all of that we went through in 2000. For the gubernatorial race, although there may be a possible federal component, I think it's mostly going to be state court and state Supreme Court. And it's interesting because the new governor on the first day in office gets to appoint 3 brand new Florida Supreme Court justices. Pretty important. But he can't appoint them if we don't know who he is.
Right.
So the ones that are there would have to decide any issue. But my point then is simply every vote counts. And we'll continue with that in a moment. After a word from we have Mac on line 1. Hi, Mac. How can I help you?
Go ahead, Mac. You're on with Stuart Address. Hello?
Hello.
Hi, Mac. How are you?
Hey, Stuart. I'm a local attorney, and I got to say you have the best radio ads I've heard from any law firm.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, because I usually hate lawyer ads.
Yeah, I don't like them either. They're not very professional.
The bar gets their 2 cents in there. They kind of mess things
well,
up.
Most of the lawyer ads are personal injury, and I've never liked them, and they've been approved, and they've gone to court, and
I know.
lawyers
I
have the
hate
right.
those signs that say I got you $1 million. Well, you must have been seriously injured to get that $1 million.
Right, exactly.
Anyway, that's not what I called to talk about.
Let's talk
You got
then.
me. The politics. The politics is what I'm calling to talk. I got a lawsuit for you.
Okay.
I don't have time to research it, but I think I'm right. The voters are disenfranchised. We don't have any power. The powers are held by the party bosses of the Democrats and the Republicans. And they're so polarized, nobody talks about issues anymore. They just talk about how evil the opponent is.
I agree with that.
And by the time we have an election, I don't want to elect any of them. I want to arrest them all. So it's frustrating. And here's the most frustrating part. I mean, in Martin County, you really have to register a Republican
Absolutely.
to vote in any meaningful election. And I have come to the conclusion, I've been practicing law for about 42 years. I did pretty good in constitutional law. When the parties are complaining about each other, especially the Democrats complaining about the Republicans, they're complaining about voter suppression. Well, I have decided that the most effective method of voter suppression is requiring Americans to go down to the supervisor election and declare a party. Because if I declare as a Republican, I can't ever get to vote for a Democrat till a general election.
Right, and there are a lot of states that don't require that.
I know.
That for primaries, you just go in and vote for whoever you want. You're just allowed to vote one primary.
You're right, and that would be better. I'm not sure that's the extent of the problem, because when the two parties have kind of evolved into two mafia gangs, and the leaders of the parties kind of figure out how they're going to hurt the other party. And, they put out contracts on people. You've seen them. They get up and
I agree.
They investigate them their entire term of office. I mean, it is not government by the people anymore. It's government by the party in power.
I agree with you. And I guess, I hate to be one of those old people who long for the old days, because the old days weren't all that great either.
They weren't all that long ago
But in the old
either.
days, for example, when Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House,
Mm-hmm.
and Tip O'Neill was about as partisan as you can get.
Mm-hmm.
But the ethos back then in Congress was that you compromised. It was exactly, and I spoke with this several weeks back about John McCain. It's exactly what Senator McCain said. Okay, if you're the party in power, you deserve to get a bigger piece of the pie. But you can't say, I'm going to have 100% of the pie, because then unless you have your supermajority, you're not getting anything.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay?
The problem with the party system in general, though, is that both parties have things that they say they believe in that I believe in, but neither party talk about issues anymore. For instance, I am a very fiscal conservative, and that's the reason I would vote for a Republican, because if you can't pay your bills, you can't do a lot of things. But on the other hand, I don't understand how environmental protection should be called a liberal issue, because if you can't breathe and you got poison water in your river, that should be pretty conservative basic values.
And it can't be called fake news either.
Yeah, but the reason I'll give you 5 reasons why we should not ever, I don't know who to sue, but we should not be required to declare a party when we register to vote, because number one, our ballot's supposed to be secret. And if we register Republican, they know what primary we're voting in,
but
and
if
they probably know how we're going to vote.
That is an interesting point.
Now, though, if you vote by mail, you put your name on it. So that's not anonymous.
But that's your choice then. Yeah.
Well, I think you have a code and a pin where you're still pretty safe.
It's hard to be both
I'll
ways.
tell you.
Not discovered. But the problem is, here's the other problem, Stuart, by having to say and having the whole world know that, I can go down and supervisor elections right now and get a whole list of names and addresses of Republicans.
Right, so you can do all your advertising. Yeah.
Absolutely. I should just be able to get the names of all the voters, because here's the thing, if you go in front of the county commission, if you go in front of a court, if you go in, and the thing that brought this to mind was the Kavanaugh hearings, because there's no way in hell that our founders ever intended for our justices to be confirmed straight down party lines. I mean, they have taken the checks and balances, which is supposed to be a neutral court, and turned it into a partisan court.
I could not agree with you more.
And part of that is because, here's the thing, if we have to, if I'm labeled as a Republican, which is what I'm labeled as now, because I want to vote in the elections that are most likely to actually elect somebody in Martin County, then if I go in front of a Democrat judge or a Democrat tribunal, I'm instantly prejudiced. It may not be obvious, but
I don't know if I'll go that far. I'm with you all the way so far. I'm not so sure I agree with that completely.
There's a lot of reasons why the party should not know how the voters are registered. The last reason I want to talk about, because I do have to go to work, is that if we didn't register as Republicans or Democrats, it'd make it damn hard for them to gerrymander. And they would have to actually talk about issues instead of just trying to get their quote-unquote base out. They wouldn't know where their base was or who they were.
Mac, that is a fascinating point, and honestly, that's the point that now sends all these fireworks up in my head, because that point, I think, could have some real validity in terms of a lawsuit.
We've got a lot of places have an anti-gerrymandering rule. So, I think I'd be all for term limits and no benefits for public servants and all that. But I think if we just took away the requirement that the voters have to register as a Republican or a Democrat or independent, and that was determined to be a method of voter suppression. And that data is not worth anything to anybody but for these parties who want to figure out how to get our votes and gerrymander the districts so they can have the most representation. I don't think forcing a party declaration should be constitutional. It should be an invasion of privacy. So somebody needs to research that. I'll be the damn plaintiff. I can't afford to pay the legal fees, but I bet we could start a GoFundMe page it would raise a lot of legal fees.
I think that last point is a fascinating point.
Yep.
I think when it comes to districting,
but that's food for thought. My office isn't too far from yours. So
all right. Stop by sometime and have lunch.
All right.
All right. Thank you for calling. I appreciate it. Right. I guess we don't have our other gentleman any longer.
Steve, are you with us?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, Steve, thank you so much for holding. I know that was a long call.
The light wasn't on the phone, so I wasn't sure.
How can I help you?
That's okay. Just a couple things have me irked about this election.
Okay. Only a couple?
Well, I mean, there's many, but I don't think we have the time to discuss them all. But one is everybody gets a sample ballot usually, and and if you read the instructions, they tell you to bubble in the circle for the candidate you want. Well, I heard that there's somebody that's got to sit through and read all these ballots that they got where they either drew an arrow or circled the candidate's name.
Right.
So, so now someone has to interpret what the voter's intent was.
Well, when there's a challenge, yes.
But I think if it's done wrong, it should just get chucked.
Exactly. I mean, and I'm sure they must come in Spanish.
But the legal standard when it comes to a recount is ascertaining the voter intent. If you can clearly ascertain the voter intent, then the law says the ballot should be counted.
I know here in St. Lucie County, if you slip your little ballot in and there's other marks other than your little circle, it kicks it back out.
But it still keeps the ballot so that if there's a recount, there's a challenge.
Yeah, but it doesn't count you until you do it right.
Well, it doesn't count you for the regular voting in the election. But if there's a recount, that ballot remains available. Okay. And now you have a Democratic monitor and a Republican monitor.
But the woman standing there, the man standing there next to the machine, the little machine goes ding when it takes it. They go, here's your ballot, something's wrong, go look at it.
All right, well, I agree, yeah, so fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But do they do, I mean, I only heard on the news that, apparently they're not having everybody in the room at the same time when they're doing that, or is it they have to?
What do you mean everybody in the room when they're doing what?
Well, a Republican, either a Republican lawyer or a representative and a Democrat.
If there's a recount, then it really depends upon the kind of recount and what the court orders. The machine recount, no, you don't need anybody there. They're just spitting the numbers through again to make sure it's accurate. When you're doing the hand recount, like they're going to do in the Senate race here, then typically you have the right, the party has a right to have a monitor in addition to the official supervisor of elections or that person's designee who's going to decide in that county what votes count. So that if they disagree, which is what happened in Bush v. Gore, you start fighting in court.
Okay. Well, and then the other thing, I mean, I don't know how true it is, but I heard on the news again that they just found a box of ballots in Broward County in a school somewhere. So what do they do with those?
They blow the dust off and then they count them.
When there's a recount, they get counted. If there was no recount, they would not be counted. With? Well, they look at the box. If the box is sealed, like it's supposed to be, and it just didn't get put on the truck, they'll count it.
Hello.
If the box is,
how do you not put a box on the truck? No, I mean, come on.
Exactly.
Well, I guess if you hire minimum wage people to do that, sometimes it happens. When I go to McDonald's and ask for a plain burger and they put everything on it, I sort of wonder. But if it looks like it's been tampered with, then I have a feeling that the votes won't count.
Okay. Well, it's just amazing that we just can't get it right in this day and age, and there's got to be there's got to be a better way.
There's got to be a better way and a hack-proof way.
Stick your finger in the ink.
Well, that's true. I heard that part about the hack-proof.
Right.
I mean, whatever we come up with, I'm sure there's going to be somebody else that's going to be, try to stay a step ahead.
Well, that's always the way it works with technology.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so sometimes the old way may be the best way, because it's not hack-proof. It's hack-proof.
Well, I won't play an electronic slot machine. I like the old mechanical ones.
I do too.
I don't trust the electronic ones.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Steve. Okay. I appreciate your call.
All right. Thank you.
So, Stuart, I have a question.
You have a question?
If they're going to recount one party, one
County?
Race.
Okay, one race.
Okay, they're by hand. Are they just going to recount everything on the ballot?
Well, you can't just recount the African American race.
No.
No, I know that's not what you meant.
What I'm saying is, in the individual, for governor, for Senate.
No, they're only going to count the race that is challenged and is subject to a
But if they're going to handle and look, why don't they look at the whole ballot?
They're not going to look at all 13 ballot measures, 7, races in certain areas. No.
Really?
They're just going to look at the election that is subject to challenge.
Wow. So,
why would they look at an election where the mayor won 72 to 18?
Because they're looking.
But it's a waste of time.
Okay, but we have the two that were so close.
Yeah. The governor's race and the Senate race.
So
amazing.
Will they look at both of those by hand?
No. The governor's race they're not going to look at by hand because it's under 0.5%.
That's crazy, though, because they're going to do it anyway.
But no, they're not. But I understand. They're going to do it anyway because of the Senate, so they'll have the ballots. Why not do the same thing?
Take a little glance at the other box.
I'm sorry, you're too logical for me.
Okay.
I'm sorry. You can't be that logical.
Well, why not?
Because
they're going to do it.
The statute was written under 0.5%. It's a machine recount. Under 0.25% is a hand recount. And I think we should add an amendment to that statute. I really do. That's a good point. It's a very, very good point. I don't always agree. I never agree with you. But that's a good point. I think there should be subsection C of that statute. In the event that a manual recount is required in any race, if a machine recount has also been required in another race, it is now at manual recount.
Why not?
I think that makes a lot of sense.
They're already doing it.
Yeah. We agree.
Yes, we do.
But it's not going to change anything. All right.
We got to get that on the ballot. We'll vote for it.
So let me give you a few other statistics on the election, and not our election necessarily. Since 1980, the primary voting turnout in Florida has been less than 30%. And for the general election, it's become a fight to get to 50%. It's happened, but it's tough since 1980. This week, 62%. And it's not just us. It was literally throughout the country. I guess, oh God, I don't want to say this.
Yeah, go ahead. I know what you're going to say.
I guess that's one benefit of having
good or bad,
an emperor without clothes as president.
That's why. Because
people are so motivated one way or the other that they're going to that ballot box. And truthfully, you should go to that ballot box no matter what, because
it's your right as an American.
It's your right.
I think it's your duty.
It's people have died for it. People would die for it in other countries. It is really a special right to exercise.
We agree again.
We do. Okay. Now, in Georgia, in the governor's race, where they were seeking also to elect, I guess who would have been first, either Mayor Gillum or I forget her name, the woman who was running for governor in Georgia. Whichever one was called first would have been the first African-American governor in American history. And if we got both of them, you would have had two. Well, we got neither, at least so far. All right. In the Georgia race, they had 4 million votes. It was decided by 63,000 votes. The number sounds like a lot, 63,000. But when you look at it in the context of 4 million, it's really not. Now, one of the big races they were talking about all night on TV, the Texas Senate race, where a Democrat, Beto O'Rourke, I remember the name because I've heard it so many times, was seeking to do what? Become a Democratic senator in the state of Texas? Huh? That does not compute. If computers are zeros and ones, that's a 4. It's spit back. It would make the computer explode. It doesn't happen. And it didn't happen. Oh, but it came so close to happening.
Well, the demographic of the makeup of the state is changing.
But it is still
and everybody in Austin
solidly Republican.
Everybody in Austin went out and voted because Austin is very
well. Right, you have certain segments of the state that are mostly Democrat, and they're mostly the southern sections that border Mexico. And the rest of the state is as solidly Republican as you can get. And in that race, out of 4.3 million votes, it was ultimately decided by 200,000 votes. Now, that's a larger number, certainly larger than the 15,000 votes that separate
I mean, the demographics of Houston itself changed tremendously after Katrina.
Yeah, and
because the population changed
with more immigrants.
No, people who had no homes left in New Orleans.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
But with more immigrants, you have more voters, legal immigrants.
Okay, keyword.
You have more voters, and initially, at least, they tend to be Democratic voters. There are a lot of Cuban voters now that are Republican, but initially, when Cubans got to the United States, they were reliably Democratic
But the
voters.
parties have changed.
They've changed beyond definition.
I mean, the Republican Party is not my father's Republican Party, nor is the Democrat Party.
It's nobody's Republican Party other than
yeah, but they were
Senor. I don't want to say anything.
It used to be, though, that the working people supported the Democrats, and it was just definitely the party of the rich.
Well, guess what, folks? I'm here. I'm doing Facebook Live, and of course, somebody knows that I do this every Friday. So what happens on my iPhone? My ex-wife tries to call. Now, I know she's not listening to this, but, that's just...
Did you tell her you have a radio show?
She knows I have a radio show.
Okay.
So, of course, she's calling. It's like... So I click reject. And, boy, I've been clicking that button a lot, folks. All right, so I get to say a little something about my ex. So, even in Texas, things are changing.
Yeah.
Let's do one more. This is an older one, and we'll do two more. There is a vote that I watched back in my days in college at Rutgers, where there was what's called the Eagleton Institute of Politics, and a lot of you may have heard of it because I also do polling. And it was the graduate school for political science at Rutgers, and as a senior, I was admitted to the undergraduate program where I got to take all my political science classes at Eagleton. And during the gubernatorial election of 1981, they had like 10 different TVs set up in different rooms of a mansion, which was the school. And you would hear roars from different rooms at different times. Mm-hmm. Why? The Democrats ahead by 63 votes. The Republicans ahead by 12 votes. The 1981 election was razor thin. And in 1981, out of 2.3 million votes, it was decided by 11,000. Now, in that situation, the governor who was running for re-election, Governor Florio, who I liked, was urged to file a lawsuit to challenge and to demand recounts and all of that. Gosh, this is 37 years ago, folks. He didn't do it. He didn't do it. And when he was asked, why didn't he do it? He said because it would take months and months to wind its way through the courts, and the people of New Jersey deserve to know who their governor is. So that's that. And he walked away.
And there's a cost to the state as well.
There is, but that was a moral, that was, in my view at least, a political calculation. What is best for the people, truly, not what's best for me. Mm-hmm. What is best for the people? And, I would like to hope that we're going to get more of those in Congress. And in some ways, I'm heartened. And this is not in my little set of notes here, but in this election on Tuesday, the American people elected the first two female Native Americans to the House of Representatives in our history. Native Americans, they've not been a member of Congress for over 200 years, and they were here well before we were. Finally, two of them are elected, both female. And we also elected the first two female Muslims to the House of Representatives. There was already a male Muslim serving. So we now have 3 Muslims in the House of Representatives. Personally, I believe that's wonderful. I believe it's wonderful that we have the Native American women there. And I hope that those voices, Republican or Democrat, along with the overwhelming number of new women who won seats in Congress this time, might begin to change the tenor of the dialogue and bring it to something where people can agree to disagree and then negotiate the best deal possible and hope that in the next election they get the majority and they could amend it slightly to make it look better. And frankly, before I take the next call, and I know, Bulldog, you're waiting, that's what happened with the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act was not passed with all the titles that are in it right now. It was not passed with the Voting Rights Act because it was decided that some of these things would never get through the Southern legislators. So they got what they could, and that was an accomplishment. Integration was an accomplishment. And they figured out that, let's do this, and down the road we'll try to make it better. These days, you hear both Republicans and Democrats saying, if I can't get a bill that I'm completely happy with, no bill at all. It's absurd. Negotiate, compromise, even if you have to swallow hard. Get the best thing you can get, majority or minority, and then keep working to improve that piece of legislation. But I guess nobody thinks that way anymore, at least very few do. And I hope with this influx of women and a couple of Native Americans and Muslims and, maybe we'll have slowly we'll get back to a more civil discourse because God knows this country needs it. All right, Bulldog, I see you're on line one. How can I help you? Or what do you want to tell me? It's a better question.
Good morning, Stuart. Good morning, Veronica.
Hey there, Bulldog.
I'm not gonna go in that depth on who got elected and everything. I want to hear your flavor on the constitutional amendments.
Okay.
I think there were a few in there that nobody understands because of what you were saying. Bundling on bills, they did the same thing on the amendments.
Multiple topics.
No,
yeah.
I think that people just went down the line and yes was first, and that's all they did was circle yes. Fill in that little blank.
Oh, please, I hope that they didn't.
Well, what
I think it's easier to circle no.
What I'm basing my decision on is St. Lucie County. Okay, St. Lucie County is a poor county, but we voted in to tax ourselves some more. I don't get that.
Maybe that's smart. That's infrastructure.
What
I don't
I'm
get
talking is I'm talking state constitution.
Yeah.
I'm up a higher level. I'm not at the local level here. I'm talking to like banning greyhound racing.
Okay, I was going to ask Stuart about that.
Things like that, or restoring felons' voting rights, or there was 13 of them out there.
No.
So wait. I want to understand the point that Bulldog is actually trying to make about these. I'm not sure the point that.
Well, I think I know where he's coming from on the greyhound thing. Is the rodeo going to be voted out next?
Well, I think the bottom line is what we're looking at is we're pushing a lot of bills through on the curtails of this, and a lot of people do not understand these because they have not been explained.
You're absolutely right. There are very few commercials except on two of them, and even commercials don't really tell you the truth these days. And reality is, I have a problem with all the constitutional amendments for a different reason as a lawyer. I look at the federal Constitution, and the Constitution is supposed to be amended rarely, and it's supposed to be difficult. Our state Constitution is amended all the time. I don't think that's the intent of a Constitution. A statute should be amended all the time. The Constitution should not. So this is a way to get the people to have influence, frankly. So it's not the legislators in Tallahassee that are deciding on a statute. Here's a way for the people to say yes or no to something. I understand, but the constant changing of the Constitution, boy, if you look at all the changes, the book must be, a mile long or, a mile thick. Plus when you put three different topics
in one
amendment, and this is what I'm saying about if you were doing a real legislation in Congress and you like two of them and you don't like the third, you swallow hard, you vote for the package, and you try to either get rid of the third next time or improve on it. That I understand. But when you're asking the ordinary citizenry to make a decision, you don't stuff it down their throat like that. Because that's not compromise. That's not the ability next time to go fix it. That's, unless you really hate this third thing, you got to vote yes because you like the other two. It's only
Stuart,
if the,
you know, and I will just interject with this. This is the first time that when I looked at a ballot, I had to go out and do research.
I did too, yeah.
On these stupid things to see what else is bundled with this.
Right.
So you're absolutely correct on that.
Right, and I love the several amendments where it said the economic impact cannot presently be determined. Why does it say that? Because there's a requirement to tell the voters the economic impact of a constitutional amendment.
But see, if they told them the economic impact, they may not go for it.
Well, but right, so that's why it says it cannot be determined, because at least now you're telling them what you're required to tell them. You're just telling them we can't figure it out yet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the good thing is at least, you know, Veronica, for you, the Port St. Lucie ones or, you know, the county ones, St. Lucie County ones, you can go to any local newspaper and have those sort of explained from a certain point of view. But, you know, and they're going to say, well, we you know, here at, you know, what, Palm Coast News or whatever it is, decide to vote no on this referendum.
And you get a lot of the larger papers that give their recommendations, just like they do for candidates.
There was a website. It was like Ballotopia, Ballotology, something like that. And it broke it down and it explained each one. It was helpful. But I Googled.
But
Googled a lot.
The average person doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
The average person doesn't get that engaged. And maybe it's because they don't want to. Maybe it's because they don't care. Or maybe it's because a lot of people are just too plain busy to have this as a priority in their life. Mm-hmm. They're too busy working paycheck from paycheck.
But if you don't know what you're voting for, then you should leave those boxes
I would
blank.
Agree with that.
Yeah. If
and
don't
you know,
really
sometimes there are times that I do not vote on something in an election
Mm-hmm.
because I just don't know which way to vote. And so I'm not going to vote either way.
Yeah.
Right, and exactly. In, you know, our area, it was homestead exemptions.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to look at that one really carefully. You know, increasing homestead exemption values up, you know, a certain percentage or whatever it was. But there were riders on it, and I didn't want to go that way. So, Stuart, thank you very much for
You're
your
welcome.
time.
You're welcome, Bulldog. Thanks for calling.
You have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye. And so as we sort of try to wind down on the voting issue, which, of course, takes the whole hour, which is fine.
It could actually take the whole week.
You know, I guess, folks, you know,
the rest of the month.
When you call this Ask a Lawyer, you know, you find that I'm doing lots of legal topics, and then these news topics sneak their way in. I actually like them a lot. I'm hoping that you get a sense of me from these discussions, even if they're not purely, you know, this contract was breached and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, let's look at Bush v. Gore. The Hanging Chad election.
What a nightmare.
2000 presidential election. And you know how close it was? One vote in the Supreme Court.
Right.
Decided the president of the United States.
Well, that's because they were holding up ballots to the light and no one they couldn't determine which way the voters wanted to vote.
So I guess it really is important as to who's on the Supreme Court.
But it also is important every vote counts.
Yes. And let me tell you something. I mean, I say it was decided by one vote, which in essence was true.
Yeah.
But let's really look at Florida. We had 4+ million votes, and it was decided by 537 votes. I said 537 votes. That is 0.009% of the vote. 9 1,000ths of a vote. Not even 0.1% or 0.01%. 9 1,000ths of a percent. And if anybody could come out of that election and not realize every vote counts, if anybody can come out of that election and not realize why it is so important to the Republicans and the Democrats to mobilize their supporters to get out and vote. Don't just support me in your living room. Vote. Whether you're going to vote by mail, whether you're going to vote some other absentee way or early vote, or whether you're going to go to the polls on Election Day, vote.
I'd like to know how many of the votes they had to just cast aside because they couldn't determine.
I'm sure that
which
information's
way.
available.
Yeah.
I mean, it was.
I mean, that would change your percentage, but not by much.
Look, it was a really crazy
Yeah.
litigation. I mean, several times up before the Florida Supreme Court.
Do you know that they're saying now in this vote that some of the ballots don't have the little circle fully colored in, and it could be a problem? Hell,
Come on,
come on
but
already.
Then the legal standard, when you have a recount, a hand recount, the legal standard is the intent of the voter. The intent of the voter is clear. The vote is going to count. Now, if you have an oval half filled in, and then you have another one 3/4 filled in, no, that vote's not counting.
Right.
Because you can't tell.
Right.
I
You
mean,
can't, if
3/4
you
versus
mind.
a half isn't enough to tell the intent of the voter. Okay? But if you can tell the intent, I mean, come on. Look, I can't make a perfect oval and fill it in 100% perfectly. I know I fill it in well enough that it's okay to the machine. But, not everybody can even do that.
See, that should have, fixed the hanging Chad thing because that was like a
Right.
punch card. But we fill in the oval, people.
Yeah.
If your pen's not working, find one.
So let's look nationwide, throughout the country.
Okay.
In 2014, 4 years ago, midterm elections, the voting turnout overall throughout the country was 36% of registered voters. On Tuesday, it was 49%.
That's still sort of pathetic if you think about it.
And I was just about to say, wow. Because to me, that is a wow. Because 36% is so pathetic, 49% sounds like heaven.
Yeah, but it's still less than half of.
You're right. It is. And that's the problem when votes can be this close. You sit home, and your friend sits home, and then, your whole extended family sits home, and your family might have decided the election.
Mm-hmm.
Because, we've talked about statewide and national elections this morning. There are local elections, folks. There are local elections that are decided by one vote all the time. 5 votes all the time. Mayor, city council, county commissioner.
Yeah, because those numbers are tiny.
It happens
The turnout
all
is tiny.
the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so if 5 people on your block decide, it's raining, that could decide the entire election for a mayor or a council member or county commissioner.
Yep.
And so my moral of all of this, really, I mean, it's sort of preachy, but my moral is your vote counts. It is valuable. Exercise it. And the reality is you should, because it matters to you. You should because, I agree, there's no right, you have no right to complain if you didn't even vote.
Mm-hmm.
And literally, we have soldiers everywhere in the world fighting to protect us and fighting for democratic values. They die, they are injured, they come back without limbs, they have PTSD. And honestly, I know a couple of them that have been clients of mine. They go and fight for something they believe in. To come back home and us not vote, I honestly think that's a disservice to the men and women that serve in the military. And let's take it a little step further. There are so many nations in this world, really, that would give anything for the right to vote. And if they have the right to vote, there are a lot of them that would give anything, the right to vote and have it count, right to have a meaningful vote, a free vote, not a vote where, the president or the dictator is just going to take those 20 extra ballot boxes he has in the palace, and they'll get counted, and he wins by 92%.
Or his competition just disappears.
Well, and that happens too throughout the,
Yeah.
that happens throughout the world. Your opposition is assassinated, they disappear. We have free elections here. They've gotten nasty and brutal and honestly disgusting, generally. And we've sunk into levels that I never imagined as a nation we would sink to, with all sorts of voter suppression. That is not American. I hate to say at least, because who knows, that may change next. but at least nobody goes out and kills their opponent or has their opponent killed. At least not yet
So
in
far.
America. At least not yet
Yeah.
in America. That's it. I was motivated today just with the closeness of all the votes, and I could have told you another 30 or 40 of them throughout the country. I felt I try to stick close to home, but as I watch, I'm one of these political junkies, so I sat in front of CNN and MSNBC, until 2 a.m. Very tired next morning when I woke up. And, I'm not looking like, and I hear the same thing 100 times, so I know it's like I'm not getting new news, even though it's breaking news.
Mm-hmm.
It's not breaking news. But, I'm watching, some of these commentators are really, they're smart. And they talk about trends and things that are going on, and they really are interesting, and they mean something. And if you sit there and you watch that, you can't help but feel that if you exercise your right to vote, or if you even go further, like so many did, so many women ran this year, and that it's in part the Me Too movement, it's in part, with all due respect, President Trump. So many women ran, and so many women won.
Scary.
It's not scary. I have to hope that they're going to do a better job in power positions, in leadership positions, and at least getting the tone more civil so that we can talk and legislate. And if they fail, then I don't know what happens. We're winding down, so we won't talk anything about the smorgasbord of calls that come into my office and the varied types of calls that we hear. Maybe we'll talk about that next week. But we have about a minute left, so thank God the political ads are gone for now.
Oh.
We return you to your regular broadcasting day. I hope you all have a really nice weekend and don't argue about politics. It's been a tough election, and it has legal consequences to all sorts of statutes. So I will be back next Friday. This is Stuart Address. This is Ask a Lawyer. And have a really wonderful weekend. Thank you.
This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
I'm Steve Kathan. Evacuations have just